general advice is that, obviously fundamental drawing skills are helpful. Learn to draw characters doing things. But remember that your drawing in this case is to serve a story and to serve your ideas. People aren't tuning into your webcomic, or I say tune in, people aren't looking it up because, well, I mean, art style certainly does help, but chances are they probably like the content of your comics a whole lot. So make sure you have good content and you know how to communicate it. And that's my advice. Really tell a story, because there's always going to be an artist who can draw better than you. Think about what you really have to offer. So, that's your voice.
Hello, my name is Annie, and you are listening to World of Webcomics, a podcast all about interviewing creative people who are telling their stories online. Now, if you read comics, especially if you read comics on Instagram, especially if you like comics about robots, you probably know today's guest, and I will allow him to introduce himself in a moment. I think he gave us a lot of really valuable insight in this episode, and he's also being very generous in giving us a lot of valuable insight by creating an online course. We're going to talk about that in the episode, but we do have links in the description as well. So if you are an aspiring artist, definitely check out his work and all of the awesome resources that he is making available. Without further ado, let's go to the interview. Alrighty, for those who do not know, could you please introduce yourself as well as what you are known for online?
Hi, yeah, thanks, Annie. My name is Dominic Cellini. I am a comic artist online who also does some character design and visual development on the side as well. I have illustrated and wrote my own children's book as well, 21 Terrifying Monsters, and I am known for my webcomic currently running, Emmy the Robot.
Yes, and I would love to go more into those projects. But before we do, I would also just like to know a little bit more about you. How did you get into art in the first place and get to where you are today?
I always say I've been drawing for as long as I can remember, and I mean that in the literal sense. I can't remember a time before I was drawing. Some of my earliest memories are drawing. My dad would, bring home these big sheets of poster board from the office. And I would just take my markers and I would draw all over them. I loved Halloween stuff, so I would draw haunted houses and tombstones. And, my mom loved that. This 3-year-old who is obsessed with all this like gothic imagery. And, then I had a big bird phase. I was, a big animal kid. So I wanted to draw all the different animals and birds and whatnot. And I loved animation, I loved the pictures and books. I would try to recreate them myself. I would, watch certain scenes in animated movies over and over again. I didn't realize, that this was making me an artist.
I can see that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know that I've seen a lot of perhaps like Tim Burton inspired work from you as well, and some cosplay. There's some really
Uh,
cool costumes that you've done in the past as well.
Cosplay, I mean, it was some, Halloween costumes, before I wish I was cool enough to cosplay. I need to start going. If we ever have conventions again,
Yes.
I'm told I look enough like animated characters. I get, if I had a nickel for every time, you look like so and so from this movie, you look like, Flynn Rider, you look like Linguini, you look like whatever the skinny, big-nosed, affable male protagonist is. Like, yeah, yeah, waiting for
Yeah.
the comparison.
Yeah, you have that, like, the face for it, like, able to suit different characters. That's funny.
When I was doing this presentation at a local grade school, I had my little my cartoon avatar of myself, and the kid goes, "Why did you draw the guy from Blue's Clues?" And I said, "That's me."
You're like, "Close enough. That's
Right.
fine." I love it.
Mhm.
So, are you doing mostly webtoon right now, or what else are you up to as far as being an artist in the world, making a living?
As I, told you off air a little bit, I
Yeah.
am also currently recording. Well, actually, I just finished the recording for my online course for Class 101, which is a site a bit like Skillshare that offers online courses taught by, comics pros and some of your favorite artists. They're pre-recorded, so you download them, but we offer one-on-one feedback to our students who take the course. Now that I'm finished with that, it has finally gone live as of this Friday, the 18th. So if you want to check it out, it's out there for you.
Yes, we will definitely link that when this episode goes up. So that's
Hmm.
so cool. And I, again, would love to ask more about those opportunities and kind of what you've learned. Before we get into that, though, let's talk about Emmy. Why webcomics? How did this come about? And I know you started posting on Instagram, but I guess my first question would be what made you want to make this story a story to be told online rather than like a traditional print story?
Well, the short answer is convenience and sort of circumstantial. When I first created Emmy, I had this sort of story idea in my head. It was a little bit of a raw story, but it started to form over time. I kind of conceived Emmy, I would say, around probably early 2019, maybe. Yeah, the very beginning of 2019. And so I started doing all these doodles of her, trying to figure out her character. And when I finally got to a design that I was happy with, I shared a little development page. I just thought, well, I want more character design work in my portfolio and whatnot. I had done a lot of fan art and whatnot, but I wanted more original characters in there. So I thought, let me share this character. Maybe people will like it. And people really responded to her in a way more than I had anticipated. So eventually, I wanted to give people more of a feel for her personality. So I just made like, a couple little comics with, no real ambition behind them. They were kind of quickly drawn just to kind of get a sense of who this character is and, what she does, the world she inhabits, and all that. And people just really responded to it, especially on Instagram. And I just thought, well, why not keep at it and show them a little more? I didn't have a set schedule or set continuity quite yet with them. I was just kind of testing the waters, and it's like, well, here's an idea with Emmy. Maybe they'll like this, maybe they'll like this. And as I practiced, I just kind of got into the habit of like, okay, I kind of like this. Instagram really responds to comics for whatever reason. A lot of artists complain about the algorithm. We're kind of at its mercy. And for whatever reason, the algorithm really rewards comics. So, that gaining a lot of visibility for my work helped motivate me to keep at it. And, all these people were saying, I'd really like to see more of her and, what her story is about. All these people started speculating. And I thought, well, I had already done, a self-published and illustrated children's book. And, as much as I enjoyed it and learned quite a lot, there is a ton of additional work into getting the book actually into print and whatnot and distributing a book, especially if you're trying to get things done through traditional means. It can be very difficult to be picked up by agencies and publishers, as you may know.
Yes, I think webcomics create a really great opportunity for that as well. What was
Right.
your experience with the children's book? Was it something that you did release in print or was it only available as an ebook?
Yeah, it's still available in print. Yes. So what I did is I published it with Amazon. It's great, if you're a first-time author, like I was, and you are, you have limited means because printing, multiple copies of your book can be very expensive, especially if there are a lot of illustrations and colors. Amazon covers it. They handle the distribution. Every time someone orders a new copy, it comes from their warehouse, so they get these little books, and they made it a lot easier. Now that Amazon is kind of like ruling everything, you can understand why with their convenience. It really saved me a lot of headache. 21 Terrifying Monsters is really I kind of went into it knowing I was inexperienced. I thought, well, let me just go for it. I looked for traditional publishers and whatnot, and then I thought, I could end up sitting on this book for months or even years. I kind of just want to get it out there, partially just so I could say I have a book on my resume, but maybe I could just chalk it up to my impatience a little bit. And maybe it's the same reason I went the webcomic route with Emmy. I just thought, like, you know what? Sometimes you just have to get stuff out there and you can't wait for the gatekeepers to, open the gates for you. Self publishing out there, sometimes it doesn't have the best rep because there is no quality control. It is open to anybody, but there's a lot of incredible self published work out there. So, I'm definitely among some very talented writers and artists. So, upon releasing it, it was very exciting just to know like my book, the places it had reached. People in England and Mexico, were telling me, oh, yes, I got this for my classroom of first graders and they love it. And stuff like that is incredibly rewarding. The convenient, wonderful thing about, internet publishing is that it's even more direct to consumer. It's instantaneous almost.
Yes, that's so true. I'll also link that as well. It's a really fun book. Like it's so charming, the illustrations.
Oh, thank
And
you.
were you the writer as well?
Yes, yes.
What would you
Basically,
call
everything
like
done myself.
limericks? Are those limericks? What would you call them?
Oh, yeah, they're just like poems,
Okay, yeah.
did you ever, like, read, like, the, Shel Silverstein books?
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
like, Where the Sidewalk Ends, Light in the Attic. I loved those as a kid, and, what I liked about him, oh boy, this guy, I really like this illustrator and writer, but his last name, he has one of those East European last names that's near impossible for me to pronounce. He did this book called Squids Will Be Squids, and it was in a similar vein, and it was the kind of book where when we had reading time in grade school or, indoor recess if it was raining, it was the book that all the kids would fight over. Like, oh, gotta get that book first. It's the funny one. And, much like those Shel Silverstein books were like that too, I wanted to make a book that kids, wanted to like grab onto, that felt fun, sure it reinforces some good behaviors, but, it's disguised in humor, it rhymes. Rhyming, for anyone who is an aspiring children's book author, rhyming nowadays can be a pretty hard sell for traditional publishers. And while I had been advised against it kind of after the fact, after I had written a lot of it,
Interesting.
I thought, you know what, I just liked the rhyming. Call it cliche if you will, but I don't know. I thought it was fun. I had a lot of fun writing it.
No, I love that. Again, I think it really adds to the charm, and rhyming is really great for promoting literacy in kids too. So
It
that's
is.
interesting to hear that that's, like, something to be advised against.
Well, it's not, it's not necessarily a faux pas. I think a lot of publishers maybe read so many manuscripts that are rhyming, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who they try to get by on partial rhymes too much, so the rhyming isn't done that well. And if you read enough of those, I can understand. If you're a coverage reader or an agent or editor, you get to the point. That's it. No more rhyming. I can't look at one more.
That's understandable. Yeah,
Sure.
I always try to imagine things from the publisher's perspective. I'm sure that's a
Sure.
whole another kind of job to deal with
Yes.
too.
Promoting books is hard work too. Yes.
But I love what you had to say about, like, the gatekeepers and everything, because that's what excites me about, like, the world of webcomics is
Yeah.
that there's not as many limitations. And I think part of the compulsion to create is also the compulsion to share, and this really
Absolutely.
provides that community. So, for you, what was good about self-publishing, I guess, aside from
Mhm.
that, and what do you wish that you knew kind of moving forward?
Well, I'll tell you, again, the good thing about self-publishing is the lack of waiting. They say even if you do get picked up, if you do manage to get picked up by a traditional publisher, even a big one, on top of being one of the last people to get paid, they always tell you that. Not that anyone should go into children's book publishing, with the intention of becoming, becoming rich. I think you'll be disappointed. But there are so many other hands on it. The wonderful thing about self-publishing is that ultimately, no one, you answer to your own judgment. When you're dealing with big publishers, you're dealing with editors and whatnot. And while I'm sure a lot of them make, choices for the better in many instances, as artists, of course, I think we hate to give things up. Sometimes we hate to compromise, even if it is a necessary part of having a career in the arts. Something about being, unrestrained or being, how would I put this? When you're given, the control and free reign over something, it's so liberating, and it makes it all the more rewarding when you see people really respond to it. It really makes you feel like, you're putting your voice out there, that you literally were the one who put it out there. And if people are really enjoying it and responding to it, then, it's some great validation.
Definitely. Having posted initially, I believe, on Instagram and now kind of moving over to Webtoon as well, do you feel that there are any unique benefits to those platforms?
Well, the thing is, social media or hosting sites like Webtoon, they all have their pros and cons, like the internet does, because this is a very new area, relatively. Books have always been around, but I mean, we're talking, when we're talking webcomics, sure they might have been like a niche thing when we were young, but I think about it, some of the first, truly popular webcomics are some of the things that, inspired me as an artist early on. I think back like in the DeviantArt days when I was, 13, 14, and I had my favorite artists I followed on DeviantArt, and they had their ongoing comics, and they just really inspired me. And, these weren't comics, we read in a store. I had comics, I'm a big collector of Calvin and Hobbes and some other things, but the majority of the comics I read were online. And I think that's especially true now. They say a lot more of the comics are read on sites like Webtoon or Instagram. A lot of people are reading things on their phones.
Yes, I hear a lot of people kind of have this sort of cynicism about comics, like, "Oh no, the industry is dying." And I always think, "No, it's evolving."
It's
So,
changing, yeah.
yeah.
Comics has, I think, always been about, accessibility, it's about ease of finding it. Comics until like really like maybe the 80s or 90s, because we took classes on this.
Yes.
Like, they weren't considered high art at all. They were always considered, they were always cheap. They were always, they were made of like cheap material and paper. Kids would buy them for like a nickel and they were, easily disposable. That's kind of how they were seen. Comics showing up, on your Instagram feed, it's not that different.
Very true. Oh, and for the record, just for anyone who listens to this, Dominic and I both went to SCAD. So we have a degree in comic books, something
Yes.
definitely worthy of bragging about.
We shared a couple
Yeah.
online courses together
Yes.
to get ready for lots of alumni talk,
Yes, which makes me want to ask without, disgracing our alumni name. For those who are thinking about going to art school or not, like, would you recommend it?
I recommend my class instead, save some money.
There you
Save me
go.
some money. Scad's got enough money. I'm kidding. But in all seriousness, in this time where we are, a lot of schools are confined to, online learning and whatnot. I will say, and I did mostly online learning, my time at SCAD. I can tell you, I learned a lot of great things. It's a very impressive school, obviously, with a lot of incredibly gifted staff, very impressive alumni. And, I had plenty of professors there who were wonderful. But art school it's been a big discussion for a while. It's not
Mm.
always the most accessible thing for people. It is very expensive. They're private schools. Not everybody, like, people in my situation, I was lucky enough to be able to have the option to take it online. But if you were in my situation and your moving fell through, sometimes it's just even a geographical, issue. The great thing about this day and age is that there are so many resources, even outside of art school. Again, I do cite my class, but, if you prefer another type of artist, you can find a lot of your favorite artists probably have some kind of Skillshare class or even YouTube channel, or maybe they even just stream. I know a lot of artists do stream on Twitch and those types of sites. One of the best ways to learn is just go for it, just draw a whole lot. I don't mean to disrespect the SCAD. I had a great education there and I'm very fortunate to have had that opportunity. But, if you want to become a comic artist, you don't need 6 semesters of art history. Not that there's anything wrong with art history. I think it is good to learn. But sometimes I do think we get a little hung up on, oh, what school did you go to? Where's the degree from? Especially if you're in high school, there's a lot of talk on that. I can tell you, in my short time out of SCAD, no one's really asked me where I went to school. They want to know about your work.
Yes, couldn't agree more. It's all about your portfolio. What can you actually show for?
Right. I will say though, to SCAD's benefit. Now, before SCAD, I almost went to a different school that was more local. I'll tell you, switching to SCAD, I think it definitely improved my skills as an artist because I had to really step it up. The local state schools and whatnot, they did not have art programs that were geared toward an industry at all. It was a lot of life drawing. Not life drawing is important, don't get me wrong, but you're drawing a lot of fruit. You're doing a lot of fine artist stuff. There really isn't much of an arts industry as far as entertainment goes in the Midwest. So being at SCAD, really showed me what level you want to be working at. And, it definitely equipped me with some of the skills to make my portfolio better. So, if you can take that away from art school, I say, go for it. It definitely helped me. But if you're somebody who already, has a good idea of what they're doing and how to get it out there, you already have eyes on your work, then maybe it's not the path for you.
Yeah, I definitely think there is so much value to having a specialized art program, but at the same time, it is really exciting too to see things like your class, things like Skillshare, making
Thank you.
those opportunities available to people who might not otherwise have that access, for sure.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's opening up, the world is becoming less local. Have to, be at school to learn from a pro now. It's incredible.
Definitely, yeah. And coming back to what you are actually creating and your story, it's been so fun to see this character who just seemed to be just immediately born. Like she's instantly so likable and so recognizable. And then to see the story become bigger and unfold from Instagram to now kind of
Mhm.
a more traditional narrative. I'd love to hear you speak on the actual writing aspect of it. Like, how do you approach the story? Is everything figured out? Do you work from a script? How did it go from just little
Yeah.
comics about Emmy answering questions to actual the story of like her being a maid and performing her maid duties?
Well, like I said, I already kind of had the story in my head. I was thinking about ways to get metaphors into stories without them becoming, how would I put it? There are certain metaphors that are hard to tackle with human characters because they instantly become uncomfortable or heavy or, or even just like too mature. When you add kind of a fantastical element, whether like if it's like a fantasy, creatures, or you make it about anthropomorphic animals or robots in this instance, it adds a little, more whimsy to it. I like drawing, fantastical stuff like that. I had this sort of basic blueprint in my head, but as you make a comic, it does affect the way you write because then you start to realize, oh, okay, I don't have time to draw these crowd shots that I had in mind. Like you start to realize like, oh wait, I don't hate myself. I'm not going to make myself draw, this
Yeah.
audience full of people. Maybe I'll make the scene take place in a more confined space, things like that. But I guess I knew once I started a more narrative story with Emmy, I thought, okay, well, we're going to just go for it. Like I said, I started out just doing these little one offs. And while, Emmy is, fairly self contained, I thought, okay, I might as well just go for it now. Why wait? So I just thought, you know what, let me just like make a little beginning for her, quote unquote, and we'll just make a chronological series of comics. Cause I would just kind of do them as the ideas came and people would say, wait, when did this happen? And I thought, well, why don't I make a chronological series of these comics? Kind of have an outline. I have a sense of where the story's going. I say planned out, it depends to what degree. I know generally the story's direction and I generally know how it's going to end. I don't intend on doing it forever. There are, things you have to kind of figure out as you go. I guess that keeps it interesting.
Yeah, I've made this comparison before, but it's a lot like television writing, I think,
Yeah.
where you have a general idea, but it's flexible too.
Right, exactly. Like let's say I write something and people really respond to it. I'm like, okay, well, if people really like that, I could do more of that. Sometimes you don't want to bend too much to the whims of your audience because sometimes doing something, you know what you're doing and it takes a little time and you just have to tell them, okay, well, just wait, you'll understand. You'll understand. Sometimes I get questions about things. They're like, well, wait, doesn't it mean this? And I'm like, just wait, you'll see. I know what I'm doing, I think, maybe.
Yes, I think that's part of the fun of, like, the interaction of webcomics is, like, you can tell that they're thinking one thing and you might be able to surprise them, so that's fun, but you're also just like, "Just trust me, it's okay, like, it'll work
Well,
out the way you want it to."
and the big thing about webcomics as opposed to, I mean, I would love to, have a full print book of Emmy someday, especially, being on Webtoon, reaches more young teens and stuff. Print book would be able to reach even more young readers. I'd love that someday, a more complete, Emmy collection in a book would be a dream come true. I'd love that. But when you get a book, you get a complete story. Whereas in a webcomic, if you're following it and it's not finished, you're getting out one piece at a time, one piece at a time. So I'm really the only person who knows where it's going.
Yes, and so the children's book is basically print on demand, is that correct? Or
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, you order it, you'll get a print book. You
okay.
don't have to do anything. You just order it, and a print book will be delivered to you.
The reason I ask is if you were to do Emmy as a book, would you do it as, like, a Kickstarter or some other or that method?
I don't know yet, honestly. I think that would be a good ways down. Yeah, I really don't know yet because who knows what the state of Kickstarter will be in 5 years. The new platforms and whatnot and ways of funding things are always popping up. We've had like a Patreon boom in the past like 3 years.
That's true, yeah. Again, more and more opportunities.
Exactly.
It's exciting, even though it's uncertain.
It's an exciting but uncertain time, exactly. I always get a little panicked, when it's something like Instagram or one of these social media sites, that I have a readership on, does something new, and then people are like, "Oh, that's it. This is the end of Instagram." I'm like, "No, wait, please. I've worked so hard to
Don't
get you
leave.
here."
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm trying.
Yeah. Well, another thing I've said a million times on this podcast, and if you look at which webcomics I tend to interview people on, I am a big robot fan. I love robots. I love sci-fi
So many
because
possibilities.
Exactly, and as you were beginning to discuss, and I'd love to hear more on, is this idea of being able to address themes that might be uncomfortable otherwise. So, for you, what sorts of themes are you interested in exploring in your work?
Well, I don't wanna get into spoiler territory quite
Fair
yet,
enough,
but
yeah.
machines, there's especially in Emmy's case, there's a huge theme of conformity. I look at the sort of the nandroids, the nanny bots, as the sort of like dramatization of the idea of perfection and conformity. Certain people can relate, especially if you're someone who's a bit of an overachiever, somebody who, perhaps has a lot of pressure on them, who is considered brilliant but has very high expectations, and anytime they fall short, they're very hard on themselves. I think of when I was coming up with Emmy, I thought, what is the personification of the perfectionist personality? The sort of the anxieties of falling short of your goals. The thing about robots that's very interesting, that I'm sure you'll agree with, is that robots, unlike people, they're made with a specific purpose in mind. They are their jobs. Sometimes I think about, you'll hear about somebody getting, so many of our peers, they overwork themselves and they get carpal tunnel, or, God forbid, they have some kind of accident that, impedes their motor skills. And I think, oh my gosh, I lack so many other practical skills. Sometimes I wonder, oh boy, it's a good thing I can draw.
Oh my
And
goodness, yeah.
sometimes it's a terrifying thought to think, what would happen if I couldn't do the job that I think I was made for? In Emmy's case, Emmy's world revolves around, oh, I take care of this family, I do this. The nanny bots are all about duty, conformity and excellence. And, that's, you can do that with people, certainly, but I think there's an added element of, there's a cutesy element. And as people have said before, there's something, I don't want to quite say dystopian, a little like Orwellian about, the Nandroid's world. I mean, if I had like a quarter for every time, seriously, every time I post a comic, someone goes, "It's Detroit Become Human. It's iRobot." I'm like, it's not. I'm not trying to be that dark, but I like a little bit of, I like sci-fi, related humor and stuff like that. It's meant to be much lighter than that, but it's fun to play with the idea of, yeah, in real life, robot servants would maybe be a little unnerving, maybe would be, sure, they're cute like this, but, people say, oh, I wish I had a real Emmy. I don't know if I'd want a real one. A little uncanny for me.
It's funny because I almost feel like the cutesy aspect of it makes the dark humor hit all the more. Like, I forget what the line was exactly, but she was like, "Okay, now let's go into indefinite sleep." It's just
Yeah,
like, "Oh,
dreamless and definitely lost.
yes." I love it.
They just shut off. They just, well, because, Emmy, the way I write this, I'm not going for very hard sci-fi. Like, sometimes I get very, I don't want to say nerdy, but these very specific like questions or theorizing. People all over 4chan and Twitter are like, "What do you think they run on this kind of battery?" And, what if the emotions are just faked? Well, surely it's this kind of response program. I'm like, I don't know. It's just a cute robot. I mean, yes, there is some of that awareness, but, yeah, like you said, it's just a cartoon robot. The robots in this are very humanoid. They are very, intelligent, and people ask like, oh, is she sentient and whatnot? I mean, I'm not about to tackle, what may be one of the biggest questions in our coming lifetime. I mean, you can ask Elon Musk, I guess, and those guys what they think. But it's fun to then subvert that with something to remind you that, oh yes, there's a big gap between her humanity. Sure, she can seem so human in some ways and yet not.
Yes. And it's interesting to hear you bring up these really thought provoking ideas of like identity and how that relates to career. I think that's really relevant to a lot of artists for sure.
Oh yeah.
And something I really want to give you kudos for is the fact that you have been able to create this character who is a perfectionist. She's really good at a lot of things,
Yeah.
but she's not one dimensional either. She's not just like a Mary Sue, I guess like a lot of people stress out about that. And she's not. She's got
Right.
layers to her. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on like this might be a difficult question to answer, but
Sure.
for you, like what makes a good character?
Oh, no, no, this is fun stuff to talk about because, there's so many different things. I mean, one, there's just the fundamental, like, sure, there's like lofty, writing rules, but also sometimes people just want like good company, like sometimes, like, especially when TV shows or, anything that's like serialized more so than a movie, movies we're more willing to spend time with like maybe someone who's really despicable who we don't like, but it's 2 hours. In a TV show, even though we may love some shows about, very morally gray or sometimes even crazy characters, whether you watch like Breaking Bad or Killing Eve or, those shows, but we still want good company, if that makes sense. If you really don't like watching any of these characters and if you couldn't see yourself talking to them, or enjoying being around them, you'd start to think, well, why would I want to tune in and spend, an hour with them every day? So that's one factor. Another thing is I like flaws. I'm a bit of a goofball myself. I think I don't I've never been one who's gravitated, I think, towards characters who are written to be so cool. Like you said, even though the term's kind of overused, the term Mary Sue, when I think of that, or, Gary Stews in the case of, it applies to both, male and female characters, of course, where actually I think more so male characters where they'll write this, somebody's the ultimate badass and, he doesn't have weaknesses and he's just a cool guy and he always says the same thing and, he's just the main character. That's always been so boring to me. I like I like someone, who's a little bit of a mess. Even somebody like Emmy, who, like you said, she's good at so many things. She's such a perfectionist, and yet she falls short to understand certain things. She has, certain little neuroses. She's even a little like high strung about certain things. Flaws. People are drawn to flaws, I think. Emmy, I mean, even though she's made to be perfect, and I certainly designed her, with that in mind to be, cute and appealing, sometimes people ask me, oh, what would Emmy think of this? What would Emmy think of this? And I'm like, look, Emmy probably doesn't agree with you on everything. Like, she's not just, I mean, sure, I mean, if you talk to her, she'd probably be agreeable on anything, but, Emmy is, she's wonderful, but then in some ways, she's probably like talking to your grandma, you know? Yeah,
Yeah.
so I like to think, without flaws and weaknesses, I don't think there's conflict, and I think, especially in Emmy's case, there's more of a case for misunderstandings and comedy. It's hard to have comedy revolve around a perfect character.
Very true. And I think a lot of times people hear that advice of like, give them real flaws, make them real human characters, and misconstrue it to be like you were kind of alluding to, this sort of super edgy anti-hero all the time. And I think that there's something so fun about just characters that are just nice and good. Like it's you can write moral characters still too.
Certainly, and even they can be flawed, like I said, like,
Yes.
people are like, "Oh, Emmy is an angel, she's perfect." I'm like, "Look, Emmy, though, is probably, a little old-fashioned, though, for you in some ways, and also, sometimes she's probably a party pooper, and, and like I said, like, a little high-strung." I mean, and we all, like, kinda know people like this sometimes.
Definitely. I
Yeah.
also liked what you were saying about people being very interested in like how the sci-fi works. And I'm on the same wavelength where I'm like, it works to serve the story. Like I don't really
Thank you.
care.
Maybe, maybe, I'm a little old-fashioned in the sense, I know in the one of the frustrating things about this age that we're living in with the internet is it's led to this huge, nitpick culture
Mm.
where we feel like, "Oh, man, we really gotta understand." Don't get me wrong, I really like and appreciate when something is in depth and they've really thought out a world, with a lot of details, but do you ever watch, like, certain animes like My Hero Academia? You ever watched it?
I haven't. I know it's really popular though, and been recommended it before.
Well, see, I'm not the biggest anime guy, but sometimes my brother and I would watch it, and the reason I bring it up is because that show, while it has its, its own charm, it's one of those shows where there's no subtext in the show, it's shown in anime, so subtlety isn't its thing, but everything is very, logically explained in the world, even though it's very fantastical, everyone has powers. The world is very well thought out, but at the same time, everything is laid out for you in a very matter of fact way, in a way that many, maybe more like Western like type cartoons or other writing styles just don't lend themselves to. In my case, as much as I care very much about Emmy's story, and it is a very meaningful story to me that I hope I get to see through with everybody. I still want to tell people, like, look, at the end of the day, it's just a cartoon about a robot. This isn't, again, I'm not trying to write the next Blade Runner. Uh, the premise is cute robot doesn't understand certain things, navigates complex world. That's not to say that I don't have world building, and that's not to say that I don't think things through. I have little bits of lore in my head that probably won't make it into comics, but I can make into supplemental Patreon material. I've even made a street map of neighborhood Emmy lives in and where all the houses are. So I have like all the streets named, the parks. I just something for fun, things like that.
That is fun. And that's something I wish people would understand as well is like you can go crazy with world building. You just don't have to put everything into the actual
Well,
story.
and just like what you said, world building, it serves the story. It shouldn't be the other way around.
Mhm.
Story doesn't serve the world building. World building is there to serve the story. When people, hem and haw about something, oh, well, that's, they just changed this rule in this movie when we never saw that before. And I to say what some of those franchises are, but you probably know what they are. I say, part of me is like, who cares? Who cares? It's cool. And what? They made it work in the story.
Kudos once more for
Mhm.
making the world building very organic. What would be your tips for achieving that?
Make it stem from your characters. So I think sometimes I don't know if there's any set way to do this. Sometimes people think of the world and then they think of the characters who populate it. And that can really work in some instances. So like let's say you think of a story world and there's this kind of specialized job they do in the story world. And so you're like, okay, well, then they'll have a crew, and then on this crew we'll need somebody who does this and somebody who does this. In this case, I built the world more out of Emmy. So once I had a good idea of who she was, it's weird. I don't want to say she popped into my head kind of fully formed, but well, certainly not visually. Visually, it took me a long time to get her looked like just downright like how I had it in my head. But her personality, it just kind of came to me at the same time as the story world of high-end robots, outmoded robots, and what happens to them. What's the life of the high-end robots like? What are they taught about outmoded robots? What's their world like? And it's like you said, like if world building creates more opportunities for story and serves character, then I think that's good world building.
Yeah, definitely. Speaking of the visual aspect as well, I just am in love with
Hmm.
your style. It adds a lot
Oh,
to
thank you.
the world as well. It's sort of like, I don't know, like an alternate 1950s, I guess.
A little bit, people will debate sometimes about the yeah, time period, and I tell them it's not set any particular time. It's just like, well, you go on. I'll
No,
explain.
yeah,
But
I would
what were you
just love to
saying?
hear more about like who are your artistic influences and kind of how you've developed like the unique aesthetic of the comic.
Oh, well, thanks. Yeah. So again, it came into my head. I love retro aesthetics, and I kind of knew I wanted this to be more of a retro futuristic world. Like I said, it's not exactly 1950s per se, but it is very 20th century. There's definitely, yeah, that like atomic age design sensibility to it. That sort of, America's golden age. Obviously, it's a popular aesthetic. It's something about how would I put this? I just didn't feel the story's visuals would have demanded like Gears of War type cyberpunk. You know what I'm talking about? Like I'm not trying to make it look like a Detroit Become Human, even though there's nothing wrong with cyberpunk. It's cool, but this world, it's not Blade Runner. This world, I think of it. It's not exactly the Jetsons, but it's a world I think of my own. It's a world that sort of advanced technology very quickly, but I had to think, okay, this is a world though where people are still we're having house servants and housemaids is still pretty normal. So I felt like the older aesthetics were more appropriate. Even Emmy's maid outfit is kind of old fashioned. It's not quite Victorian made, but it's a little bit it's a little bit pre-war. It's old fashioned. So I kind of just built the world kind of around her, like I said. And as I was doing the comic, one of my big influences, as you asked, is I grew up, well, we grew up in a great age of cartoons on TV. One of my favorites was Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. And, I'm not shy about saying, it's influenced me a lot in this case. My art style for Emmy is a bit distinct from 21 Terrifying Monsters, which is a little sketchier and more messy. But for Emmy, I wanted a more clean look. I talk about this in my class a little bit. I looked at some of the artwork of UPA. Now, are you familiar with like the UPA era of animation? Like the 50s and stuff. Like that was stuff like the Mr. Magoo cartoon. The old like Dick Tracy cartoons, stuff like that.
Oh, yes, I love all those shorts. Those are so fun.
Oh, me too. I love, yeah, like Rudy Toot Toot, Gerald McBoing Boing. I love those. Oh, the Tomorrowland cartoons were a big inspiration for, yeah, Emmy's art style. The Disney made these great cartoons in the late 50s and 60s for Tomorrowland, and I saw that and I was like, yes, that's that's what I want to go for here. So it's also a big help that it's a simple style. The big thing about UPA is that UPA was kind of low budget. So, out of necessity, they had to have kind of sparse backgrounds. They had to be a little abstract. They had to play with a lot of geometric shapes and whatnot. So, it was very convenient that it taught me a lot of artistic ways to get around doing certain kinds of backgrounds. Sometimes I'd be like, oh man, do I have to draw this whole kitchen behind her? And I look at a UPA cartoon and I think, oh no, wait, this can be enough.
Yeah, I think there's actually a bit of masterful levelness in being able to know how to like cut corners. Like a lot of people think that that's
Yes. How to
exactly,
simplify.
yeah, and it's funny to hear you say that because I notice your environments and your backgrounds a lot. They're actually like very rich and I feel like really enhance the story. So,
Well, thank you. Well, I do love rich backgrounds. I mean, look, I like any artist will tell you, I can't think of an artist, our age who wasn't influenced in some way by Disney. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty, but people like me, obviously, yes, I grew up on Disney and Pixar. I love those. Obviously, growing up with Calvin and Hobbes, I loved Calvin and Hobbes. But when you're doing a certain type of work, the release schedule, the constraints of the work, people are viewing it on phones. You don't want so much detail that's going to be wasted. I sometimes miss drawing realism. Sometimes I'll just do it for fun because the Emmy comics are more simple and clean because I know people will be reading them on tablets and phones quite a bit.
yeah, it's funny because with something so hyper realistic like Detroit Become Human,
Right.
it's almost kind of distracting, like they're kind of like showing off the technology in a way,
And
whereas
yeah.
something more appealing like your style makes those moments that are heartfelt so impactful, like the little hug when they first meet. Oh, I think I
Thank you.
literally clutched my heart when I read it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, that's a big thing. I talk about it in my class, if, there's always going to be, artists who can technically draw better than you. But one thing, if you're going to be, telling stories, that you really got to get down is being able to sell emotion and character acting. And you can do that with very simple looking characters. It's about how do you really sell those moments, even big emotions or even subtle emotions. How do you really sell that? That hug took me a few attempts, but I saw it so clearly in my head. I thought, okay, yeah, I really got to make that look how I want it to. I want it to feel warm, like a Christmas morning.
Definitely. And there's a sequence I love as well where we're introduced to a lot of the other children characters. And it
Mhm.
almost reminds me of the beginning sequence in 101 Dalmatians where it's like, oh yeah, their robot matches their kid or like their kid matches the house like
Right.
perfectly.
That was a lot of fun. I'll tell you, it was a lot of work too, though. I mean, drawing all those houses, but I really wanted to put in the work there because though, again, it's just a piece of world building, it tells the story. It tells you, yes, this is the kind of community they live in. Yes, I don't think anyone here flies coach. Yeah, yeah. It builds the world. It tells you, a little bit about because people were asking, well, what happens to the other, androids that were adopted into other families, and now you know.
Yes. And I'm sure this is something that we could find out through your class, which
Mhm.
again, I don't mean to be jokingly making plugs. I actually think everyone should check that out. Like definitely check out that class. But what would be kind of some of your big tips for character design?
Well, yeah, again, yes, I go over that in my class, which is on character design quite a bit. But if I can narrow it down to the big ones, first is think about appeal. I know appeal is kind of a nebulous term that's thrown around a lot, but appeal can come from simplification, just like you said. Like, a more hyper realistic style can sometimes look good, but like you said, sometimes it can look uncanny. And when it's uncanny, that comes at the expense of losing appeal. We start to go, I don't identify with this as much now. I start to see its difference. Appeal is the opposite of that. It's seeing those qualities in a drawing, even if it is a very simple character, even if it is literally a robot. Another one is, draw from life, draw people. Take those life drawing classes, but also use reference. I think every artist I know, we love Pinterest. Pinterest is my favorite form of social media now, and I have like 8 followers. I don't think I follow anybody on Pinterest. I probably am terrible at the social aspect, but I just use it for photo reference. It's just a wealth of it. There's all kinds of outfit reference you can find there for clothing, so much reference for homes, like I used in that one comic you brought up. Yeah, it's just, the internet is a wealth of resources. It's just a shame not to use it. So, yeah, I definitely emphasize in my class to any young artists starting out, use reference. You don't have to punish yourself. It's not cheating. We all do it.
Yes, definitely. For some reason, there's this misconception that that's like a cheat, and it's not. It's you're being a good artist like that. Use reference.
I can tell you, a quick anecdote. One time I was doing this drawing presentation for a local arts festival thing we have on New Year's Eve, and I was taking drawing requests from some kids in the audience. It was just a couple people kind of shuffling in and out of the room, and I was so embarrassed because I was afraid to pull up a reference on my phone because a kid asked me to draw a stormtrooper. Now, obviously, you can picture in your head if you've seen Star Wars, a stormtrooper is pretty iconic. Even if you haven't seen Star Wars, you've probably seen one before. You can pretty much instantly picture it in your head. But as we know, to get it on paper and draw it takes some trial and error. And when people can literally see you drawing, I had my screen up on a display because I was doing it digitally. I started to panic because I was like, I don't know how to draw a stormtrooper. So I had to pull out my phone and I felt embarrassed, but I shouldn't have been. I should have just had it ready.
No, yeah, it's one of those things. You gotta, especially being able to like perform art like that. Like that's, I can imagine that that's pretty nerve wracking.
Oh yeah, yeah. I don't recommend it.
Well, I would love to ask because what is so awesome is that, again, people do love Emmy and it's getting the recognition that it deserves. So, for you, what would be your tips for growing an audience online?
Growing an audience online, it is hard. It's like yeah, I'll tell you, the ritual is, it's not for the faint of heart. You, it's hard though because it does feel mysterious, doesn't it? Because it's for so many artists when you ask them, when I had a smaller following before, I would ask, and it's kind of an embarrassing question to ask, you feel like, because you feel, oh, I don't want to seem like I'm not about the art, but I really want more people to see your work because it is rewarding. And I think, for a while, because I think a lot of big artists got tired of being asked it, there was this sort of stigma against asking, there was this sort of attitude of like, don't ask, it just happens. Just focus on the art and it will. And while there's certainly some truth to that, that can be a frustrating answer if you're struggling to get your work noticed. Because let me tell you, there are so many incredible artists I see have much smaller followings than they should. There are artists there are artists who I look up to, who I like refer to, who have a much smaller following than me. Now, granted, they probably have better jobs than me, but but what I mean is, exposure is a fickle thing. I started getting more exposure when I did some fan art that really took off. I would say, well, okay, no, I will say on Instagram around summer of 2018, I had around maybe 1,500 followers, which is still pretty decent for some people. But maybe in the world of professional artists, it's still considered pretty modest. I really wanted to grow. So that's when the kind of draw this in your style challenge kind of took off, if you remember that.
Yeah, it's still going on.
It is. Well, now it's kind of reached the saturation point where I think there's so many going on, people don't have time now,
True.
even though they are fun. I just did a bunch of those because not so much just for the exposure. I just thought it was fun. I started doing those, and that got some more eyes on my work because bigger artists who would host those would share your work. And I can't emphasize enough, if you are a bigger artist, be generous. In fact, that reminds me, I have some fan art of Emmy I should probably share. I have a backlog of it. There's no reason not to be generous. Sharing something on your Instagram story, retweeting something, or even just commenting on somebody's drawing saying, "Hey, great work." It takes a minute. I know we can be busy, and sometimes it can be draining for people to expect an instant response. But I say there's no reason not to be generous. Now that I have been lucky to have a very active audience that's growing, I see no reason why I can't be generous and help smaller artists grow.
Definitely, yeah. I think there's this kind of shyness around artists because it's like obviously we all want to like share our work and have it be seen, and yet we're so like coy about like asking those sorts of questions. But concrete things like doing fan art, doing art challenges, but
Mhm.
doing it from a place of like I actually want to do this. I'm not just doing this because of the numbers.
Right, exactly. Well, I will tell you, like I did some Mario fan art that got a lot of traction around late 2018, early 2019. I like Mario. I wasn't doing it because, a new game had just come out or something like that. I felt like drawing them. So I did these kind of Disney-esque designs of the characters, something fun I like to do every now and then, and people really responded to it. Fan art certainly gets attention. It's characters people recognize. So I did some of that. I did some character designs for Great Gatsby that people really liked. I like the book, and every teenager has to read it in high school at some point. Did you?
Of course, yes.
Yeah, of course, and I liked it actually. I didn't really appreciate it in high school. When we read it in college, I appreciated it a lot more, and, yeah, that was fun. And once Emmy came around, I'll tell you, yeah, the algorithm, at least at this point in time on Instagram, I can say, favors comics. Twitter is a little fickle. Twitter has very frustrating cropping for images. It's a little more challenging on there, but who knows? Getting an audience and following online can be very fickle and random. But if I had a piece of advice, I would say draw what you want. Don't draw for algorithms or, what you think an audience wants. The more you almost find your niche and what you really like, you'll attract people.
Yeah, definitely. I know one of my favorite artists on Instagram now, I believe is like Steph C. I don't know if that sounds familiar to you, but she actually did fan art of Emmy, and that's how I found her through your story. So and now
And
she's like one of my
she's
favorites.
well, she's one of those in mine. She's actually a very good friend of mine, believe it or not. And
Oh, okay.
yeah, we talk all the time. And I remember I discovered her on Instagram and Twitter a while back, but before she did any fan art for me. And I was like, "You are really good." I said, "Well, I have more people not heard of you. I don't understand why you don't have like 50,000 followers." I was like, "Your work is really cool."
Yes, yeah, it just boggles my mind. But yeah, it is interesting how the algorithm does seem to favor comics on Instagram. I don't know if it's just because of like the relatability aspect of it,
I
but
think it's
yeah.
engagement. I think
Yeah.
comics have a lot of people comment on them, and right now Instagram is really favoring comments. So, if you don't respond to your comments, I'll tell you, when people comment on your posts, like it, respond, reply, say thank you. I mean, it's good manners anyway, but it helps your engagement. Even if a lot of comments are kind of, non-starters, again, I can pull out about 40 comments on any post that are Detroit become human, Detroit become human, and just, Emmy's cute. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Smiley face, you know?
Is this on Webtoon? Is this on Webtoon?
It's like, yes.
Look at my profile. Where can I read more? Just click my name.
Yeah. Speaking of this might be an easily answered question, but do you have a Patreon? I believe you
I
mentioned
I do, and
okay.
I love it when people subscribe to it.
Yeah, do that. Go to the class and subscribe to the Patreon.
Yes, yes, it starts at $1, so if you don't have much, some people it's funny, some people will, like, like, pledge, like, $15 and then, like, they can't, and then they just cancel. I'm like, "Well, you can go down to 5." I'm
Yeah.
kidding, of course, everyone's financial situation, I'm just teasing, but, It's different, especially right now in these times. I know everyone, a lot of people are struggling, so I'm especially grateful for any generosity on their part.
What has been your experience with Patreon? Has it been especially helpful? Is it a lot of extra work?
I haven't had it very long, but, so far I think it's a good way, to show some support to an artist. I think it's a great idea for a platform. I don't have a huge following on Patreon, but, those who are there are very loyal, and I really appreciate them. We have lots of fun rewards for you guys, including monthly exclusive comics that I make. So, there'll be a little comic I post at the end of the month, that you won't see anywhere else. It's just for patrons, and they get the comics early. So, they are ahead of anyone else. Then Webtoon gets them maybe a week or two later, and Instagram and Twitter are further behind.
Those are good incentives. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I want to incentivize people to subscribe on Webtoon, of course, because there's ad revenue on there. Of course, it supports me more financially, to follow me on Webtoon and see things there. But of course, I still share on social media as well, just at a later date.
There's a lot of talk about artists kind of making this art thing work by having like multiple revenue streams. Is that kind of how you've managed to make it work for you, like with teaching and comics and
Yes,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah, and as a consequence, you feel like sometimes you're working several jobs.
Yeah.
But, again, every artist who's starting out, probably has a day job at some point, unless you're very lucky, when you get, hired at Nickelodeon right out of CalArts or something. But like, many of us have, yeah, find that balance when you work freelance. But it's possible. It's possible. I've seen incredible success stories. The guy who makes those, pet comics, the pet foolery ones, one of the most popular web comics on Instagram. His Patreon, it's incredible. I'm thinking, wow, to be that guy. So there's a lot of inspiring stories out there from people just doing what they love and being able to make a living off of it.
Yeah, I think that's what's so fun about teaching too is one kind of informs the other. The more that you learn, the more you're willing to share with people. So it's great to see you doing that as well.
Well, exactly, because when you're teaching, you and I are very young, so, there's a little bit of that. I don't want to say imposter syndrome, but, you're very much like, well, you know what? I'll be as
What is
generous.
that? Yeah.
Well, you want to just be generous with what you know, so you're like, you know what? I'm just going to share what's helped me.
Yeah, definitely. Speaking of other things that could be helpful, could you give
Mhm.
us some of your time management tips? How do you make all those different things work for you?
Right, I know that's something I'm still working on. I know, like, life-work balance. Time management, I'll tell you, I've given now that I've, finished filming my class, I had a very busy summer. I've been cooped up, at home, obviously, because of the current situation, and working from home has kept me in, but I've been so busy, to tell you the truth, that these past, few months have flown by. With the class, with the comics, with other things, staying busy, for that long can kind of run you down. So I really, encourage you to take breaks. I've taken the weekend off and it's been great. And I mean, I'm trying to take the weekend off. I still draw because I can't break my habit, but you don't have to draw every day. It's okay if you take a break. In fact, you should, because it's better for your neck, your eyes, your wrists, take care of your body. And I don't work in the evenings generally. What I normally do is I set aside time during the day. So I wake up, I eat breakfast, and I get to work and I eat lunch. I don't keep to a super tight schedule, but generally speaking, I do stay to that routine. And I usually try to finish my work by 5:30, and then it's dinner time. There are times where I am extra busy where I will work into the evening, but I try to avoid that when possible.
Yeah, I think having that structure is so important. And you kind of already answered another question I would have had, which would be about like self care. I think that's something that when your passion is also your career, it can easily get tied up. So it's
Oh,
important to
yeah.
have that time for yourself as well.
Exactly. Well, yeah, we get our ideas from our downtime.
Yes. Speaking of, do you have any other like hobbies or interests aside from art?
Yeah, it's so funny when people ask me that. like people will ask me, and I'll say, "Well, have you ever tried drawing a comic?" And like, it is my life. No, I'm kidding. But well, I play music for fun. I can play a little guitar and piano. I played guitar since I was 13. That's a nice way to unwind. I'm a big movie guy. I know a lot of people are, but in my evenings, that I try to take off, I try to watch a new movie almost every night I get the chance. We even have a little projector set up in the house since we can't go to the movies right now. So we got a cheap little projector and a little canvas screen. And now we got a subscription to like HBO, and we have this big library of movies now we can watch. I love movies. It definitely informs my storytelling and art style. And like most boys my age, like any millennial boy, I love playing video games. I'm not the biggest gamer because I just don't have time, but I'm playing through Paper Mario right now. So
Fun.
it's not a terribly exciting life outside of my art. I'm not rock climbing or anything like that.
I know what you mean, though. It's funny. I'll like finish something and I'll be all proud of it. And like to reward myself, I'll draw something else. It's like,
Oh,
okay.
what? That's exactly what I've been doing on my days off. I'm like, finally, now to draw some things that are just for me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm so excited to be done drawing. Now let's start drawing.
exactly.
Yeah. That's interesting too though, the idea cuz I mean obviously visual storytelling in general is there's a lot of overlap, especially just with sequential art in general because of storyboarding, but what do you think is unique to comics like that they can offer as a storytelling format?
Well, comics don't move. So I talk about this in my class a little bit once again, where what you choose to show in a comic is very key. The way you draw your characters, it's all very, how should I put this? It's all very deliberate. You control everything. In a movie, especially anything that's live action, you're talking about independent factors, actors, the elements and things like that. The thing I'll tell you about what's unique though about the relationship to comics, because even animation differs from live action in that way. But what is unique to comics, I think, is summed up by like my experience with something like Calvin and Hobbes. So when I was younger, we would be on the road a lot. We would drive down from Illinois to Florida a lot to see doctors and specialists for my brother, and we just didn't fly often. We mostly drove, and it's a long, long drive. It's about 2 days. And, we didn't have a DVD player in the car. This is before tablets or anything like that. I mean, if we really wanted to get fancy, my mom would let us get out the laptop and we could like run a DVD on it and it would like burn your lap because those old laptops, how hot they'd get.
Yes.
But, that was a hassle, so most of the time, if you can read in the car, you can only do it so much, but I would always bring my Calvin and Hobbes books. I have all of them, and they're all well-worn and dog-eared. When we first moved into our new house, I had my own room for the first time, and it was bigger than our old house, so I'd get scared at night, and if I got scared at night, I had that comic next to my bed because, it was lights out, but I had my, I guess I'll say night light, but it was it was like a lava lamp too because, I was a big boy and night lights were for little kids. And I would turn it on and I would read Calvin and Hobbes by it. And, it was a nice distraction so I wouldn't be scared at night. Things like that. Just that special little relationship you can have with comics. You can't there's a portability factor. You can just pick up a comic and put it down anytime. It's not that way quite with TV. It's not that way with movies. There's something about physically holding, a comic in your hand that just it creates a different relationship a little bit.
Yes, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that story. It's inspiring to hear just because, yeah, I think there is something so special. It's almost kind of like intimate in a way. You get like lost in this story. It's just you and the art, you know?
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, exactly, exactly. It's yeah, exactly, it's at your own pace, you're reading it in your voice. Yeah, exactly.
Definitely. Well, again, I thank you for coming on and sharing your thoughts. But before you go, I would just love to hear, in general, what would
Uh-huh.
be your big advice for people who are looking to get into this webcomic game?
Remember, my general advice is that, obviously fundamental drawing skills are helpful. Learn to draw characters doing things. But remember that your drawing in this case is to serve a story and to serve your ideas. People aren't tuning into your webcomic, or I say tune in. People aren't looking it up because, well, I mean, art style certainly does help, but chances are they probably like the content of your comics a whole lot. So make sure you have good content content and you know how to communicate it. And that's my advice. Really tell a story, because there's always going to be an artist who can draw better than you. Think about what you really have to offer. So, that's your voice.
Yes, very true. And for people who want to find you, where all could they find you?
Oh gosh, even I have trouble keeping track now. So you can find my book, 21 Terrifying Monsters, on Amazon, both ebook and physical. You can find Emmy the Robot, my comic, on Webtoon. Just look up Emmy the Robot. Or you could follow me on Instagram or Twitter. My Instagram name is domcell with two M's. My Twitter handle is @domcelliniart. You can follow me there. And I post my
Awesome.
art on both places.
And your class. Where can people find your class?
And my class, yes, my class is available on Class 101. Just look up
Awesome.
my name, Dominic Cellini, and the class should come up, Character Design for Comics and Children's Books. That's the course, and it is now available.
Very cool. Well, thank you again. I really appreciate you giving me your time, your thoughts, and I hope you have a good rest of your day, too.
Oh, well, thank you. I hope you do too. And yeah, no, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you again to Dominic for giving me his time and his thoughts. He is just one of those people who obviously simply lives and breathes art and was such a pleasure to speak with. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. I know that it was a pleasure for me to kind of just hear him talk about his stories and get all of his insight. And again, as we mentioned in the episode and at the start of the episode, you can get some of that insight. So definitely be sure to check out his course. Of course, check out Emmy, check out his children's book, 21 Terrifying Monsters. All of that's going to be linked in the description below, along with his social media. So definitely be sure to check that out. Check out my editor, who, again, I have, and I'm so happy to have. Zoe is awesome, and she did a great job with this episode. She's also got a wonderful Instagram that you should check out. You can check out my Instagram too. I have one of those. And I also have a comic that has robots in it, although it's definitely not as family friendly as Emmy, but if you're interested, you can check that out. It's called Soul Match and it's on Webtoon. Link in the description as well. Lots of links down there. Definitely be sure to check them all out. I love hearing that these podcast episodes are a source of inspiration or entertainment for you guys. Please let me know, what did you find valuable in this episode? I apologize for the kind of sporadic updates lately. I've had a lot of stuff going on, but please subscribe, put on the bell, I don't know, do the YouTube things, because that is how you will guarantee that you will never miss an episode. And until next time, bye guys.
It's not for me to say.